It is the Big Ten opener, folks, for the Buckeyes, and maybe a little bit more resistance than we initially anticipated in East Lansing. Welcome to Buckeyes Live right here at the Voice of College Football. We come your way typically on Wednesday, 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Please subscribe and just go ahead and hit that like button. We got Steve Hellwagon, of course, from Bucknuts, and we've got Tony Girdman from BuckeyeHuddle.com and also the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. Guys, how we doing?
Doing great.
Doing well.
And heading out on Friday or Saturday?
We're going, I don't know. Tony, what are you guys doing?
We're still heading out on Friday to be there for team arrival in East Lansing. So,
okay. No, we're not interested in any of that frivolity.
Frivolity. Well, when Mark D'Antonio was there, he got this program to a situation where a night game in East Lansing was a pretty daunting task, both on the field and then also in regards to the atmosphere, considering Michigan State's start, which could really be nice if Aiden Chiles hadn't thrown into double coverage against Boston College. This crowd, this team should be pretty psyched for this game. Do you guys expect a fairly electric atmosphere?
Yeah, I think my experience there is it is a great place to go watch a game. Pretty nice campus and a great setting and a pretty good stadium. I put it kind of middle of the pack in the Big Ten, kind of below the first 6 or 7, but certainly well ahead of the Purdue's and Indiana's and Rutgers. And it's much better than Maryland and, the bottom ones. Northwestern, the old place, probably the new place will be nicer, but at any rate, it's usually pretty good crowd for the first half. The last time they were there, Ohio State just blistered them, and the game was over at halftime. There was one time, probably 10 or 15 years ago, the Detroit Tigers were playing a playoff game the same day, and it was like 24-7 at halftime. Ohio State may have scored a touchdown right before halftime, and it was a mass exodus. And it was kind of cold that day, so people headed out, left the stadium to go watch the baseball game. And I can also remember one time, I don't know, Tony, did I mention this to you? Were you the one I mentioned it to yesterday? That I went back up to the press box after the game. Ohio State had won 45-7. Jim Tressel was the coach, and Mark D'Antonio was on the other side. And I saw Mark D'Antonio after the game. He was going up to film his coach's show up in the broadcast booth, and he looked like somebody had shot his dog, that like his best friend had just, racked him 45-7. It was bad, but D'Antonio definitely got his revenge in 2013. They beat Ohio State to win the Big Ten championship. And then, or rather they beat Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game. And then in 2015, they beat Ohio State in Columbus, went on and won the Big Ten championship and got into the college football playoff. So he did exact his pound of flesh a little bit from Ohio State, but really, since they played each other in I want to say 2016, and it was 17-16, and it was a miserably cold day up there in East Lansing, it's been very lopsided ever since. Ohio State's won the last 8 games in the rivalry and the last 9 trips to East Lansing, going back 25 years to 1999. And Michigan State beat Ohio State up there 23-7 that day. Just a miserably awful day for Ohio State. But Ohio State's dominated this rivalry. Other than those 2 losses in 2013 and 2015, Ohio State's pretty well dominated the modern era of this rivalry. And it has it's like margins of 20 to 30 points on average.
Yeah, but even with that, I still feel like 24 points in this game is a lot.
Oh, no doubt.
For Ohio State to be favored by a Big Ten opener.
Too much.
But yeah, just looking, back to that 1999 game, the last time Ohio State lost in East Lansing. The 2014 game was awesome in East Lansing because that was 2 very good teams. Ohio State came back. That crowd was awesome. The ending of that game, and then Ohio State pulled away, obviously, as part of their road to the national title. That one will always stick with me as a fun one. And then the year after that, being down on the field as Michigan State was getting ready for the game-winning field goal, and it's cold and miserable and raining, I went and walked behind the field goal post so I would know, like, get a perfect bird's eye view, or I guess a worm's eye view of the field goal as it happened. And yeah, that was not a good crowd. That was not a happy crowd that day. But I was a student, as a senior in 1998, so I know what they were going through in that one when Michigan State came from behind and probably to beat the Buckeyes in 1998. So this is a rivalry that we talked about this, I think, on yesterday or today's Buckeye Weekly podcast. Every generation has their Michigan State game of Buckeye fans, basically. And we'll see it. Has the next generation started, or do they still count towards 2015, or are we now past that? Is this the new generation? I guess maybe they're waiting for their first Spartino.
Yeah, we never want to see that. I can tell you that. But yeah, I think that nobody, under the age of about 20 probably knows what we're even talking about with Michigan State beating Ohio State. But one of my memories was that 2014 game, which, again, that was one heck of a game. And Ohio State went on the road that year and had to gut one out at Penn State, and then it's a top 10 matchup at Michigan State. And their big thing was the no-fly zone. Like, you couldn't throw the ball on them. And Evan Spencer, as he was on the bus going to the airport or whatever after the game, I think it was a night game up there, tweeted out, "We'll fly wherever the hell we want." So that was pretty good. And, of course, the Michigan State, that game the next year was so weird. It was rainy, snowy, sleety, and all this intrigue about whether or not Ezekiel Elliott was healthy or not. Mm-hmm. Then they play him, and he can't do anything. And you had Cardale Jones sitting there on the bench when JT Barrett couldn't throw the ball in the ocean, and they never once deviated. And, that was a case where Nick Saban wouldn't have worried about anybody's feelings, and he would have gone to the flamethrower in the bullpen and brought Cardale Jones in the third quarter to spark something, because that offense was dead on arrival. Ed Warner had no idea what to do as the coordinator, and so on and so on. And that ill-fated 2015 grind, or no, it was like they called 2014 the chase and 2015 was the grind. Should have just called it the root canal, as we've joked years later, because that's what it was for all involved. Nobody wanted to be there. Zeke and Bosa, they were NFL players stuck as indentured servants for their third year at Ohio State. And Bell and Apple and Michael Thomas and so many guys just wasted all that talent, no doubt.
But even like the 2000, there's games that we don't even talk about. Like the 2012 game was where that kind of drove them to that was a tough, gutty win that drove them to their undefeated season. The 2004 game with Ted Ginn scoring 3 touchdowns 3 different ways as a true freshman. I think I wore out my DVR with that one. That was like my first ever DVR, and there are plenty of highlights that year of Ted Ginn. But even when Michigan State and Ohio State don't play, Michigan State has still found a way to screw over the Buckeyes with trouble with the snap against Michigan. And so not to deviate to Michigan just yet, but so they had 12 first downs in the game against USC. The last time they had that few first downs was that Michigan State game. They had 10 first downs in that game. If they had 11, maybe Ohio State goes to the playoffs in 2015, and who knows what happens there.
Well, they would have been playing Iowa in the Big Ten championship game, so you might as well just say they would have been in the playoff. Yeah, like Steve says, when you look at the sheer numbers, it looks like domination in Ohio State's direction in this series. But if you've lived it, this is, along with, again, Wisconsin, the domination over Wisconsin has been clear for quite some time. But still, if you've lived through it and you got some years behind you, then those are the two schools that come to mind for me in terms of being just a thorn in the side, to the point where my son, he's only in his mid-20s, and he used to tell me every year surrounding all the Michigan hype and all the hype videos and all the talk about rivalries. And this is the greatest thing that's ever event that's ever come to this planet. That he's like, well, isn't Michigan State and Wisconsin, aren't they better? Haven't they done more than? So that was 10 years ago, but still, yeah. The Michigan State game, 2005, was a really entertaining game in Columbus that went back and forth. That Ohio State opened it up with Troy Smith in the second half with Ginn and Holmes. That was a really good game.
Yeah, they were trailing at halftime. And I think John L. Smith, they interviewed him. He said, the coaches are screwing it up. If we could just stop screwing it up, something or the other. The ill-fated John L. Smith era. Now they have another John Smith as the coach, and his name is Jonathan Smith from Oregon State. The greatest modern era Oregon State football player, well, other than Chad Johnson and TJ Pushmanzada, but
Jaquiz Rogers.
Yeah, Jaquiz Rogers, yeah. But Jonathan Smith was the hero of that 2000 team that won 11 games and beat Notre Dame like a drum, like 43-9 or something stupid in the Fiesta Bowl. He's come in and kind of energized that program to a degree. And I'm looking at it, they had 18 returning starters, which was kind of a surprise in this era of the transfer portal and such. They must be, the guys who were playing up there must have been happy, must have gotten their NIL situation squared away. Although, didn't ESPN or The Athletic have a story about last year in the midst of all the turmoil? One of the collectives up there went belly up, and the guys, I think they were at Iowa or something, and they're like, I'm going to the airport and getting on a plane, I'm done. But Harlan Barnett or whoever was able to get it tamped down a little bit, and they've got what seems to be good stability in the program now.
I watched the fourth quarter against Boston College. I think they should have won the game. They were marching up and down the field, settled for field goals, took a 19-16 lead. Then somebody got lost in the secondary, just flat out burned on a long Boston College touchdown pass. And then Michigan State right back down the field. Early down, Aiden Chiles goes for the gusto in the back of the end zone in a ball that he should have not thrown into double coverage. Ball game, they lose when they were just, again, driving down the field for the game-winning touchdowns. Still had some work to do there, so they lose 23-19. And yes, Yakov, I do, in fact, remember the 84 Ohio State-Michigan State game. I believe that was a 23-20 final in East Lansing.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, Ohio State marched on to the Big Ten championship that year. Don't remember much about the game itself. Obviously, a close one and a somewhat unexpected close game against Lorenzo White and company. The 87 game was miserable. You talk about a miserable offensive effort. They threw a flea flicker, right? Or maybe it was just a play action pass where Greg Fry hit a bomb.
I think it was Tom Tupa in 87. Yeah, I was a sophomore that year, and I was in the stands. My seat was in the top of A deck in the closed in right underneath the scoreboard there. And they threw it to the south end zone to Everett Ross, I think, on the first play from scrimmage. And that was it. That was all the scoring for Ohio State. They lose the game 13-7. That was miserable.
Yeah, that whole season was miserable. Trying to watch that offense score points and lose to everybody by 3 points.
Yeah.
Every game was like 16-13.
Yeah.
All right.
Mark, you're talking about that Boston College game.
Yeah.
I watched that. The best thing about the ACC network is all of their games are on YouTube, which you can just watch really easily. But I think you play that game 10 times and Michigan State's winning it 7 times. Aiden Chiles threw 3 interceptions, the one at the end. He threw 2 that were just off target, but then also threw another 2 or 3 that were into double coverage that were dropped by defenders. Like, he could have thrown 5 or 6 interceptions in this one. Just 3 from inaccuracy and 3 others from just throwing into double coverage. So I think there's going to be possibilities there for the Ohio State defense for sure, but also he's a playmaker. Like, he will run around. He can throw all of the throws. He can't make all of the throws, but he'll throw them. And the way I equate it is to somebody that will shoot a bunch of threes and maybe they shoot like 25%, but they have the confidence to take them, which means they can sometimes make them. So he's got the confidence to take all of the throws. Sometimes he can make them. Sometimes he can't make basic throws, and you just got to figure out which one you're going to get and take advantage of the balls that the footballs that hit the defenders in the hands, because there will be some. I think maybe this will be where Caleb Downs gets his first interception as a Buckeye, but they've got some good skill, and they've got a defense that comes downhill, and they're trying to hit the quarterback. And Castellanos was running around, and they were getting him in the backfield. So I think that's after watching this and seeing them already win at Maryland, which, say what you want, Michigan State and Maryland are very similar. To go on the road and win a Big Ten team against a team that is similar to you, you got to give them credit for that. So that's why I say 24 points seems like a lot. I'm not going to be shocked when they cover, because this is Ohio State and they've got all the talent in the world. But still, I think there are some possibilities for some big hits here for Michigan State. But they have to execute, and that's something that you can't predict with quarterback.
Absolutely. I would like to go back and catch earlier portions of the game. I was locked into other primetime games, but again, this was much more entertaining than watching Oklahoma try to get a first down against Tennessee. And
boy, oh boy.
And Caleb Johnson making his latest efforts toward winning a Heisman Trophy, I guess. My goodness. So
one other quick note about that Michigan State game: they turned the ball over the first two possessions of the second half that led to 10 points for BC. So right away they were in a hole, and they still came back and then gave it back. They could clean things up, and there's a scenario there where they win that game by 2 or 3 touchdowns in the rain on a Wells Crowther red bandana game.
Absolutely. Somewhat similar to Rutgers. I caught the cut down version to that, and they should have put that game away much easier than they did, but they kicked a game-winning field goal, then had a remarkable interception by a defensive end, batting the ball up in the air to himself. So as Steve is posting, comments and questions are welcome here at the Voice of College Football. We will get to anything you have concerning the Buckeyes and the Spartans, or, hey, it's a side project. Yakov bringing to light Julian Sain has more passing yards than Alex Orgy. You state the truth, sir. 32 for Michigan on Saturday. As I noted to Steve Dace on the Michigan podcast yesterday, unfortunately, I don't think this comment made it to air because we had to start over for technical issues. But I said, my goodness, for a program that I slaughter on a regular basis for claiming 3 national championships before the forward pass was invented, you're now taking us back to those days here 120 years later.
Yeah,
but they won the game.
No, well, and as I wrote in Michigan Monday, they didn't do it alone. This was not just a team effort. This was a team's effort, and Lincoln Riley and USC helped them all they could with the clock management in the second half towards the end of the game. And the 3 or 4 big runs, 3 runs that constituted like 55% of their rushing yards. But I will credit Alex Orji. He completed his first pass beyond the line of scrimmage this past week. It was 1 foot beyond the line of scrimmage. That was the first time he's done that. And his, 9 completions now or so, or 13 completions in his career. So finally got one beyond the line of scrimmage. But yeah, they need to figure that out, and they've got some time. This Minnesota game this week is probably going to be about the most horrendous thing you've ever seen. But you can work some kinks out there perhaps. But I just don't know how much you can actually fix with him.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating because they found some things. Of course, Khalil Mullings is a better back than I gave him credit for earlier. The offensive line must be better than the way it played the first 3 weeks of the season. And the defense can be elite and really threw Miller Moss around like a rag doll. So they do have a lot to go from there, but I just can't imagine unless they can teach Alex Orji to throw about 3 different passes each week, or in total, that they can keep a defense honest. A lot was proven in that game that if they execute the right formula, they can win against a really good team, but it probably also shows that the floor has been raised for the lesser teams on the schedule. I don't know if Minnesota is quite up to the challenge, but in Illinois, that teams that they should beat, they are going to keep those teams in the game and possibly risk an upset or two. So I picked them to win inexplicably, but I did pretty much, it went to formula. I couldn't have said, Will Johnson's going to get a pick 6 and there's going to be like 3 runs that are going to account for everything, but pretty much played out the way I thought, at least in terms of what Michigan needed to do to win the game.
I'll say when your offense gets outscored 21-7 like Michigan's did, that's not you in the second half. That's not usually a formula for a win. I was impressed. It felt bad for Miller Moss because they just harassed him constantly, and he was able to make some plays in there. But his offensive line gave him zero help. That was like they're still whiffing on Josiah Stewart right now as we speak.
Yeah.
And what also is not a formula is starting a drive at your own 10 or 12 yard line with 2.5 minutes left in the game and not needing to throw the ball. So at that point, I thought that they were dead in the water, because if you can just tackle and limit a running back to 8 and 10 yard runs, then you're going to win the ball game, because you got to throw the ball down the field to beat the clock. But they didn't have to. Even when they got to the 17-yard line after the Khalil Mullings run, I thought this is going to be arduous, them just trying to get from the 17 into the end zone. And it was, but they just kept making it by, a foot here and a foot there.
Yeah.
And they didn't have to use either of their two timeouts at the end. Like Lincoln Riley let 90 seconds go off the clock, basically. Like they could have ran 90 more seconds off the clock before punting the ball, and maybe Sharon Moore uses those 2 timeouts then. But yeah, there was some malpractice. I did just see Lincoln Riley respond, say, "What did you think your defensive effort?" And he said, "I thought we played like bosses for like 47 or 43 of those 47 runs." And that's something similar to what we've talked about with the 2022 game with Michigan and Ohio State. You gave up like 5 plays. 5 plays were the bulk of the total yards, and were half of the total yards that you gave up. The other 55 plays or whatever were fine, but if your offense isn't going to do more, then that's going to make what your defense gives up even larger. And so that's what happened there.
I don't know if you guys caught what I thought to be the most egregious mismanagement of time that I've ever seen, maybe ever, in the Syracuse-Stanford game on Friday night. So, I've seen Les Miles do it. We all have a million times in terms of game management situations where there's multiple things going on, and it's still you're being paid $8 or $9 million a year. Get somebody to help you figure it out. But that was just kind of a repeated thing with Les Miles, and a few other guys are not great at it. Herm Edwards was the all-time worst in the NFL at figuring out game management situations. He was just deplorable. But what happened in the Syracuse-Stanford game, I don't know if Fran Brown just couldn't watch Kyle McCord throw another interception. Maybe that was the deal. So he just thought he'd take the loss. Syracuse kicked what could have been a game-winning field goal with about 3 and change left, 3:15 on the clock. Stanford gets the ball. They only need a field goal. Fran Brown's got all 3 timeouts. There's 3.5 minutes. Stanford starts this methodical drive. And once they get to about midfield, you're thinking, okay, you start calling these timeouts because they're a first down away from a field goal. He never called them. The clock just ran. He never used one timeout. They kicked a walk-off field goal. How is that even if you have completely zoned out during this entire time, after they've run the final play where the quarterback did one of those, like, I got to position the ball, makes it very obvious. There's like 30 seconds at that point. He doesn't even call that timeout to give Kyle McCord 30 seconds to try to drive for a field goal because they were only going to be down 2 points. They only lost by 2 points. Nope. Stanford was the one that called the timeout so that they could have 3 seconds to kick the walk-off field goal. It was unbelievable. He iced the kicker. He used his timeout to ice the kicker. Not this.
Oh, good Lord.
It was unbelievable. I've never seen anything like it.
Yeah, on defense, you have to start using them.
Well, it reminds me to bring it back to Michigan State Detroit radio guy, Tony Valenti, yelling about as I just Googled it, the 2006 Michigan State Notre Dame game, yelling at John L. Smith for not calling his timeout, saying they don't carry over. They're not cell phone minutes. You got to use your timeouts. And back when cell phone minutes would carry over, of course, again, the kids today don't know what we're talking about.
They have no idea. Minutes?
Yeah,
what are you talking about?
Use them. I mean, now you've got 4 basically in the second half with the 2-minute timeout. So like, if you're not going to use any of these, then I think at some point you probably just, well, I should have used them earlier. So now I'll look embarrassed if I use them now. And it's just like, you just let the clock run.
Yeah.
I don't know what his explanation was for it, but as coaches will tell you, more games are lost than won. And that was one. And I think the USC Michigan was as well.
Yeah. I'm thinking with the 2-minute timeout, Fran Brown was probably thinking, why in the world they need to stop the clock? I hate this thing. Why are they, this is just kind of a waste of time. Anyway, back to the Buckeyes. So the Marshall game, are we a little concerned? I guess defense would be the first thing that comes up. Of course, the play was not stellar, at least early in the game. They marched down the field. Marshall does. Stone Earl, he looked pretty impressive while he was in the game, running around, throwing, running the wrong way, throwing passes, running the opposite direction. He was accurate, and Marshall kept things somewhat interesting.
Yeah, for the game, Marshall had 4 possessions of 8 plays or longer, so they were able to sustain possessions. In the first half, they were combined 7 of 13 on 3rd and 4th down, so they were able to sustain possessions. And what I didn't get, and I don't know what each player's relative strengths and weaknesses are. I don't watch them every day in practice like the coaches do. But I think after the first or second time they had converted 3rd and short against the 4-2-5 defense, I was done with that. I was like, so correct me if I'm wrong, Sandy, but they went back in the Western Michigan game on the second series of the game and put Arvell Reese out there in the 4-3 and pulled Jordan Hancock off the field on the second series of the Western Michigan game. I don't know if it was just to get Reese on the field or show it for future opponents that, hey, they will run a 4-3. But if there was ever a time to run the 4-3, I think it would have been on 3rd and short in this last game with Arvell Reese on the field, because they didn't have anybody who could read and react to whatever it was Marshall was doing, which was quarterback run and some other things. Marshall converted those 3rd and shorts, and it wasn't even a question. They needed 3rd and 4 and got like 8. It wasn't even a simple, go measure it type thing. No, they just lined up, ran a simple, quarterback counter or something, and first down. I'm like, where the hell is Arvell Reese? Mad scientist Jim Knowles, Admiral Kilbride from NCIS LA. What are we doing here? And he got like 10 questions on Arvell Reese yesterday, every possible angle. Why isn't Arvell Reese doing this? Why isn't Arvell Reese doing that? And I got to wonder, because it doesn't add up to me. I don't know this is what Marshall did to him. Most of the teams that are going to play in the Big Ten are going to have better offense than Marshall. So go with that, however you want.
Yeah, they were 3 for 3 on 3rd down on that first drive that went for a touchdown. It was 3rd and 3 and 3rd and 4, and they did throw on both of those, but the 3rd and 1 was the goal line, the touchdown run. And obviously they ran there. I knew going in, and I wrote about it, that people are going to be frustrated after they watch this because of the running quarterback. And it was the first time they got to see a quarterback that is going to be part of the run. They're going to see it again this week with Aiden Chiles, so they have to handle it better. But what they did do is they knocked the quarterback out of the game for running the ball too much. So that is the danger of putting a quarterback out there that's going to run. And will Michigan State want to do that as much with Aiden Chiles? He's going to scramble and make plays, but he also gets hit. And he's going to take some sacks. So you're going to be careful with how much you put him out there in danger. But there was no concern about Stone Earl. They were just like, yeah, go ahead and keep running the ball. And if you get hurt, well, the NIL checks will still keep coming, perhaps. So they put a beating on him, but he was successful. And I think some of the scheming that you saw where it was basically at times Marshall would go 4 wide, and then it would just be one linebacker in the middle to contend with the quarterback and the running back. And that's not a winning proposition, because either you're being read or you're being blocked. And so they've got to kind of fix that portion of it. And Knowles was frustrated with his play, with the linebackers tackling. I thought it was interesting when he was asked about the linebackers as a whole. He said, they know what they're doing. They're reading it. They're doing this. They're doing that. Got to get better at tackling. And I think we continue to see that. And they don't tackle in practice. Most teams don't tackle in practice. Not like you'd like to tackle, not like you tackle in a game. And so right now they're still trying to improve that portion of what they do. And overall they're pretty good, but they've missed some quarterbacks the last couple of games, including this past one. And they're probably going to miss Aiden Chiles a little bit in this one, just because that's the kind of athlete that he is. But Knowles was very direct that the best 2 linebackers are Sonny Styles and Cody Simon. And then Arvell Reese and CJ Hicks are behind them. I think it's more of a top 3 than a top 4. And they'll continue to get Arvell Reese out there. I think it's interesting that this past week it was Sonny Styles with the green dot. And I think that's probably because they're going to be going back and forth with Arvell Reese and Cody Simon so much, so that the helmet stays the same, the communication stays the same with the same guy, because he's going to be in there more. But it'll be interesting to see how they do that moving forward. He did say he just wants to move the green dot around to the linebackers. But to me, it's a situation where there's going to be more and more substitution with Arvell Reese in there. And he's only a middle linebacker right now. So they're just going to continue maybe to keep the dot with Sonny. We'll see. But he's going to play more and more. And there are times where it doesn't even seem like a question that he's the best linebacker on the defense, but we don't see we don't see everything else that goes on. We don't see the missed plays, you may make a play but do the wrong thing doing it, and you have to have the right answers afterwards when you talk to coaches. Like, I remember a few years back, more than a few years back, I guess now, watching Al Washington talk about Taraji Mitchell in a coach's clinic. And he said something to the effect of, he never goes the right way, but he gets to the ball. And you kind of see like how that played out throughout his career, where he played and then he didn't. He started and then he didn't. And then he transferred, and I don't know that he ever did much there. So you still got to be doing the right things, even if you are making some plays. Do the right thing so that you're not leaving something for an offense to take advantage of. But I haven't seen that from him. It doesn't seem like anything bad happens when he's out there. I don't see him. There are other guys you're like, the guy missed a tackle. You don't often see that with Arvell Reese.
Our buddy Keep Choppin' is making a statement here about Will Howard's first 3 games, apparently 8th in the Big Ten in completion percentage. I got to say, I will like the moment in which I see a Will Howard pass and think, wow, he really, I know he's throwing some nice balls downfield, but just really had to make a big throw in a big moment. Not necessarily, I'm talking a game-winning situation, just, a drive in the first quarter against a good team where he makes a throw here and there. He distributes the football. That's what he's asked to do, and that's what he's done thus far. And the Ibuka play, the Jeremiah Smith down the seam, those are obvious type throws that he's making that need to be made. But how would you guys stack up on Will Howard at this point? Is there really anything to go by that hasn't already been seen?
Well, he was 16 to 20 in the last game with an interception, so I don't worry so much about, and that's the best team that they've played. So I don't worry too much about percentage. 17 to 28, 18 to 26. I mean, we're kind of splitting hairs here. His completion percentage is 68.9, 69%. That's pretty good. So must be a lot of good passers in the Big Ten this year. I don't know, or they haven't played anybody.
Bingo.
Yeah, he's probably 3 completions away from being like third.
Well,
yeah,
I mean, right now there are seven quarterbacks that are completing over 70% of their passes in the Big Ten. That's going to come down. If Will Howard is more likely to be around his percentage for the season than pretty much anybody but like Dylan Gabriel, although Dylan Gabriel's completing 84% of his passes right now. That's not going to stay there. So I think everybody's going to come back down over the course of a season. If Will Howard is completing 69% of his passes, he will finish, based on the last 8 years, first, second, or third in the Big Ten in completion percentage. So I wouldn't worry about that at all. But you still want to see better accuracy downfield. And that's the one question we've talked about with him when he transferred in and after we discussed who he was. And, we don't know how well he can throw the ball downfield because you don't really get to see it as much at Kansas State. And now you don't need to see it as much right now because they're not doing it, but he's doing pretty much everything else in a good rate. But now as defenses start to come up to try to stop Ohio State from averaging 12 yards per carry like they did the last game, now you're going to be able to start throwing over the top, and he's got to be able to hit those. They said that he's gotten more accurate since he arrived than he was when he got here, and he's continued to get better. And he's got a strong arm, but we'll see how it goes because those are difficult throws, especially if you're just some of these you're not even trying to pinpoint, you're just throwing it up to let somebody go get them, so it shouldn't be as difficult that way. And when you've got Ohio State's receivers, they should win more than they lose. But I do think we'll start to see more downfield passing, but I still think it's a question as to how accurate and how sure they can be. Because going back to the Boston College game, Michigan State had receivers running wide open downfield, and Chiles was not able to hit them. If you missed those, that's a touchdown that you've lost. And in the Big Ten, you can't afford to lose many of those.
Is anyone concerned about what is basically a sneaky, difficult stretch of games when you string these all together through the first week of November? Now that Michigan State has proven to have a pulse, much more so than we expected, Iowa, Oregon, bye week, Nebraska, Penn State, that's a pretty challenging run to not have a letdown. Not that this team can't have a slight letdown and still get through any one of those opponents, aside from Oregon, possibly. I still think, and I may be proven wrong, that there is a decided gap between this team and the rest of the Big Ten. I think they're better than everybody else in the Big Ten. Not that they can just roll out their helmets, but I think that they're a better team than Oregon. I truly believe that.
I wonder how much of maybe the lackluster play against Marshall for the defense is just you're ready to move on to the Big Ten schedule, and we'll see if that's the case Saturday night when they ramp things up. And sometimes I equate it to the stuff from Jurassic Park about how Tyrannosaurus Rex doesn't want to be fed; he wants to hunt. Sometimes a team doesn't want to be fed; they want to hunt, and this is an opportunity to go do that for them. And we'll see how that goes. And based on the mood from Day, this was as grumpy and as just not in a good mood as we've seen him in a while. And Knowles he's up and down depending on, I don't know, whether his coffee is cold or not, as to what kind of mood he's in. but I thought Day was pretty gruff. And so that generally bodes well for, I think, a team that Saturday, but I do not have the actual spreadsheet data on that one.
That's a first.
Yeah, I'm of a mind, I think that they're on edge because they realize that, that they got to step it up. I mean, you can't, I mean, they're come off of an open week last week. And so it's the second bad start to a game in 3 weeks and in 3 games. And you can't go on the road and fall behind 10-0 and just assume you're going to storm back and win the game 49-10. It's just not going to happen that way in the Big Ten. So you got to come out of the gate a little bit stronger. And, Michigan State, I've said this, Ohio State's rubbed their noses in it pretty good here the last decade. And I think that they're in for a little bit of a fight. Jonathan Smith is a real football coach. And, he's going to put a winner on the field there at East Lansing, I think. I'm not going to say they're going to win the Big Ten. They lose to Boston College without probably one of their best players in Nick Marsh, the wide receiver. He didn't play. And not sure what his status will be this week against Ohio State, but he had some big numbers in the first 3 games for them. They went on the road, beat Maryland pretty handily, even though it was like a 3-point win. They led, I want to say, most of, if not the whole game. So to me, Ohio State's in for a challenge this week. Getting back to your idea about this being a tough stretch, then we know Iowa's going to be competitive. Their offense has improved. Caleb Johnson, 200-yard game this past week for Iowa in a Big Ten game at Minnesota. And then obviously at Oregon. They're off this week and getting ready to put the finishing touches on what they need to do to get ready to play Ohio State. So, yeah, it's going to be a tough one. I think it's going to be a tough stretch, I think, here for Ohio State to get to that next bye.
What do we think is more likely? Ohio State leaves Happy Valley undefeated or with 1 loss?
It's more likely that they leave Happy Valley with a loss. Having had a loss, I don't know. Would the order of likelihood be 1 loss, 0 loss, 2 losses, basically? Because I
Sure.
think you're asking a lot to win at both places. In Oregon, I think they're still favored, and nobody's going to be surprised if Ohio State wins. But especially after the way Oregon started, I have no idea who I'm going to pick in that one. But I'm always siding with the home field advantage in these games. But the line of scrimmage is also important too.
Yeah, it's still football. So that still is necessary. Absolutely. Well, folks, we do appreciate you being here. Tony, what's going on at Buckeye Huddle and with the Buckeye Weekly podcast?
Yeah, just dropped a story about Jim Knowles being, as he said, frustrated with the defense. I asked him why there was no defensive player of the game, and he said sometimes you just got to speak the truth, and there's nobody that played up to that level of being a silver bullet of the game. So I wrote about that. Dropped a podcast yesterday about we rewatched the Marshall game, and 10 things we learned from that. So you can find that at all of your podcast platforms of choice.
What is going on with you this week, Steve?
I'm just getting ready for this game at Michigan State. Going to post the game data story hopefully today if I can get it all whacked out. And, just our usual array of everything that we do throughout the week, getting ready for these Big Ten games. And, the bullets are ready to start flying for real this week up at East Lansing.
Very good, folks. Appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football. We got a post-game show after Ohio State and Michigan State, and you can catch me after the Thursday and Friday games over on the main channel, meaning whatever games are being played. There's actually a decent doubleheader on Friday with Virginia Tech, Miami, and Washington Rutgers continue the Fox Friday lineup. So join us for that. Let's see. Our next show is Florida State Live at 6 over on the FSU channel. Hey, they won a game to my dismay because I had Cal plus 2.5 and the freaking field goal kicker missed 2 kicks from 35 yards in the fourth quarter. Plus, if he would have made one of those, then they wouldn't have needed a touchdown on their final drive because they were well within field goal range a third time where they could have kicked the game winner. But that happens. So
there are so many bad kickers in college football this year. I mean, it is for as automatic as these NFL guys are, it's incredible to watch the absolute opposite in college.
I was watching, it wasn't the Red Zone, but it was some facsimile of it on the NFL Network. I love the Red Zone, but I had this on, and they threw out a stat. And then I noticed like 10 more from 50-plus yards all hit after the. I think the number was 30 out of 35 from 50-plus yards in the NFL this year.
It's crazy.
50 is the old 40 or the new 40 or whatever.
Yeah.
It truly is.
All right, guys. Appreciate you being here. Have a good trip to East Lansing and bring back a W.
We will do what we can. And everybody, this one's on Peacock. So
that's right.
You can kvetch all you want about it. I'm never going to get it. Never had it. Never will. So there you go.
Unfortunately, I got my trial to watch the Purdue game last year. So I've run out on the trial. So we'll have to fork over a couple bucks. I don't think it will be the end of the world.
Somebody smash the super chat and give Mark the $10 he needs to watch it this week.
Exactly.
That would be greatly appreciated.
All right, everyone. We'll see you back here next